Welcome everybody. This is the CLA webinar to discuss the DEFRA Agricultural Transition Plan. My name is Susan Twining and I'm the chair today. I'm the Chief Land Use Policy Advisor at the CLA. The CLA land use team covers policy and advice related to agriculture, forestry and the environment. So it's probably no surprise that the Agriculture Bill and now the Agriculture Act and the development of the related policies over the last 3 years has been front and centre of our work. The Agriculture Bill, or bills, had a difficult pathway to royal assent, with Brexit politics and a general election seeing off the first bill and then COVID-19 affecting the passage of the second. But eventually it passed into legislation on the 11th of November 2020. Agriculture policy has been in development since the Health and Harmony consultation in February 2018, almost 3 years ago, with an enormous amount of work by DEFRA and stakeholders in the co-design process, culminating in the publication of the DEFRA Agricultural Transition Plan last week, which is the topic of the discussion today. The CLA has been actively involved at all stages, working with MPs and peers on amendments to the Agriculture Bill, focusing on our 3 Ts, transition, trade and tenancies. And then on the policy side, the CLA has published a blueprint for how payment for public goods could work for farming and the environment in our land management contract way back in May 2018, before the concept of ELM had really taken hold. Many of the principles are now reflected in the policy that we're seeing coming through today. Many of our CLA members have also been involved in the ELM test and trial programmes, so we've been very involved. In August last year, 2019, we published a transition policy briefing highlighting the very real problems facing many businesses from a poorly designed transition. So that is why we are here this afternoon, to find out a bit more about the plans set out by DEFRA in their Agricultural Transition Plan. DEFRA published a series of documents a week past Monday on the 30th of November, and we are very privileged to have the DEFRA Director of the Future Farming and Countryside Programme, Janet Hughes, to take us through it. But before I formally introduce Janet, I'd just like to take you through the format of the day. It's very simple. We're going to have an introduction from Janet about what it's all about, and then we'll have a short discussion between her and I, and then we will have the remaining time on for questions from you. Given the number on the webinar, we're asking that if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom bar. The Zoom toolbar, the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat function, as we're not going to see those questions. I should also point out that we're recording today's session and it will be available on the CLA website in due course. So I would now like to welcome Janet. Janet has had a long career in the civil service and is known for getting things done. So she took up the role of Director of the Future Farming and Countryside Programme in June this year and is responsible for both the shape and the delivery of the new schemes. So she will be at the helm to steer us through at least the next 4 years of early transition. So she is well placed to take us through the headlines of the Agricultural Transition Plan and answer our questions. Just to remind you, if you do have a question for Janet, please post it in the Q&A at any time. So Janet, without any further ado, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thanks very much, Susan, and thank you everybody for dialing in today and for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be here talking to you all, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And with that in mind, I'm not going to talk for a long time at the beginning, because I do just want to allow plenty of time for you to ask whatever questions you may have, and I will do my best to answer them all. And if there are any that I can't answer, then I'll find out for you afterwards. So thank you for having me here. As Susan says, I joined the Future Farming and Countryside Programme in June. And I'd been in DEFRA for about 18 months before doing that, looking after delivery on no-deal Brexit and wider Brexit preparations, and then on COVID. And before that, my speciality is in getting things done in government. So I don't have a background in farming. I am all about getting things done and making sure they work for users. So since June, I've been immersing myself in the sector by visiting lots of farms when I was allowed to do so, talking to lots of farmers and other experts in the field, reading lots of books, watching lots of YouTube, and learning as much as I possibly can about what people's hopes are for what we're doing and what people's concerns might be. And I have also studied some of the recent past in the last 20 years of failed delivery in this area, and I'm very keen that we learn the lessons from all of that. So what the programme is here to do is to achieve two things at the same time. One is to make sure we have a prosperous, competitive, resilient agriculture sector, and the other is to make sure we have better environment, climate change and welfare outcomes from that sector, from farming and the countryside. And we believe that you can't have one of those without the other, that you need a thriving sector to achieve those environmental outcomes, and you need to have environmental and climate change in mind if you want a sustainable sector in the longer term. And so everything I'm about to talk about is designed to achieve those two things together. And the things that are included in the programme, which we published in the Agriculture Transition Plan last week, and that plan has set out what the roadmap looks like for the 7 years ahead, where we are going to be implementing a transition away from common agricultural policy and onto a new English set of arrangements. And it is important to be clear that the scope of our programme is England, because agriculture is a devolved matter, as I'm sure you know. And that programme includes phasing out direct payments, and we've now set out the schedule for reducing those between now and 2024, on the assumption that that would then continue up to 2027, when we would make the last direct payments. And all of the money that would have gone into those direct payments will go back into the sector in a different way. And it will go through existing schemes, countryside stewardship and other existing schemes, which will be simplifying and improving starting from January to make them more attractive and less risky for people to participate in. And then from we will begin to migrate from those schemes onto a new environmental land management scheme, and we'll start piloting that next year. We've already got tests and trials in train, where we've got 68 tests and trials involving around 3,000 farmers already happening, testing out different aspects of what environmental land management will look like. We'll start the national pilot next year. We'll begin to roll out core elements of the sustainable farming incentive from 2022, and then all of the elements of environmental land management will be available from 2024 onwards. And that's when we'll expect people in existing schemes like countryside stewardship to start coming out of those schemes and entering into environmental land management. And we, of course, are thinking about how do we provide a smooth journey for those people who are already in schemes to get into environmental land management at that point. So that's the first major element of where the money from direct payments will go. And the purpose of that is to pay farmers to produce and land managers to produce public goods on their land. And those public goods include air quality, water quality, flood risk mitigation, climate change outcomes, as in reducing or storing carbon, and others which we've listed in the Agriculture Transition Plan. And then the other major element of what we're doing is around prosperity. And we've got a few different measures in the plan about how we're going to support the sector to be prosperous, vibrant, resilient over the course of the transition and beyond. And that includes a farming investment fund, which will include grants for productivity investment in sustainable productivity types of investments, some interventions and support, including grants to support investment in slurry management, where we know there's a large-scale market failure in the form of large-scale non-compliance with the requirements on slurry. And so we're going to invest to help people go beyond those requirements to make slurry storage safe and appropriate on farms. And we're going to be supporting innovation, research and development, learning and development, and also advice and support for farmers and land managers to help them plan their way through the transition, because we know that the farms that are more profitable and sustainable tend to have a business plan in place. And so we want to support more farmers to get that plan in place and understand what's their route through this transition period, so that we can have a sustainable, prosperous sector, as I mentioned. And then, so those are the first two key elements: environmental land management and prosperity. And then the other major element of reform that we're going to be undertaking is around how we regulate and enforce the basic rules that everyone has to comply with in farming and agriculture and the countryside. And for the first 4 years of the transition, the main focus of that will be on making improvements to cross-compliance and also the compliance with scheme requirements. And we've got some improvements that are coming from 2021 onwards that we think will start to make that more fair, proportionate and effective, where we'll be targeting enforcement activity at serious breaches and making more use of warning letters and advice and guidance to help people back into compliance on the more minor end of the scale, where the breach doesn't have a material impact on either welfare or on the environment. And we think by doing that, we can be much fairer and more proportionate in the way that we regulate and enforce the rules. But then from 24 onwards, when we no longer use cross-compliance, because we're proposing to de-link payments at that time, then we're also working now on what the future beyond 2024 looks like, on how we go about helping people to comply with the rules that everybody has to comply with, and enforcing where needed, where there are major repeated or significant breaches. So those are the things we're going to be doing. And then the other thing I want to draw out of the plan, which didn't get a lot of discussion when it was published last week, but which are really fundamental to the success of the transition, we believe, is our guiding principles for the transition. And there's a number of those. The first one being that we want to co-design what we're doing with those who actually need to use our services and systems. So that includes doing things like tests and trials to test out our policy ideas, but it also includes developing our new services and systems and schemes in partnership with farmers and other experts, so that we can make sure that what we're doing will really work on the ground in real life and will achieve the outcomes that we're here to achieve. And we think we can only really do that if we follow co-design practices throughout, and that means all being much more open about what we're doing, talking all the time with farmers and other experts, testing things out, learning and iterating them and improving them as we go. And so I'd really encourage everybody here, please do get involved. And if there's areas of the plan where you think we need more detail, the reason we haven't put the detail in yet is because we want to work through those details with the sector. So I really encourage you, if you want to help shape the future, to get involved in our co-design activities. Then the second guiding principle is that we want to help people do the right thing for their business and for the environment and for the climate and for animal welfare, rather than getting in the way pointlessly. So we want to be much more of an enabling, we want government to be enabling and government bodies to be enabling. The third principle is that we need to earn people's trust in our systems and approach. And some of the immediate improvements that we're proposing, that we're going to be making from January, to both to cross compliance and to the way we manage and administer existing schemes, are done with that in mind, because we want to show that we are hearing what people are saying about what's not working for them right now, and that we're acting on it. And all the way through the transition, you should see us rapidly, more and more, hearing what the sector has to say, making improvements, making things better, so that every single day in our programme we've made another thing better. And if we do that every day for 7 years, then we can be in a really good place by the end of the transition, we think. And the next two things are about what the actual things are that we build. And the first thing about those is we want to make them as clear and simple as possible for people. We know that one of the things people find off-putting about existing schemes is that they're not clear and they're not simple, and it's too complicated and it's not worth the candle. So we need to make sure what we're doing is clear and simple and straightforward, so that everybody can get involved, and there's not an unreasonable bureaucratic overhead or cost to doing so. And then we want to make things fair and reasonable and effective. So we want to make sure that we're not coming down like a ton of bricks on a minor paperwork breach, but that we are noticing and enforcing very serious breaches of the rules or scheme requirements. The next is that we want to make things work for those who have to use them. And I've mentioned that in the context of co-design, but it's really important that we don't just sit in our policy bubble designing a scheme that's fantastic academically, but doesn't actually work on the ground for anybody, because then we can't have any of the outcomes we want by way of a prosperous sector or environmental outcomes. So we need to be really focusing on making sure things work for people who have to use them. And finally, we want to be really focused on outcomes, and we want to learn and adapt as we go, so that we can get further and further towards those outcomes. So you will see over the course of this transition period, not the typical government way of operating, which is we publish all of the details at the beginning and then we get on and implement them come what may, but instead we're taking a much more iterative approach. And there's a tension built into the programme here, because we know that farming planning cycles are long, of at least a year, more like 3 in the case of livestock planning, for example in beef. We know that, and we want to provide timely information so that people can plan, and we are absolutely 100% focused on doing that now as we move into 2021 and the early months of that year. And you will see lots more detail flowing in the first 3 months of next year on a number of these things that I've mentioned. But we want to balance providing that clarity and certainty with making sure we get the certainty and clarity right. And we will do that by iterating and improving and learning as we go. And so there's constantly going to be this tension that we carry, where we're trying to judge what's the right amount of detail to be nailing down, given what we know at any point in time, so that people can plan, and what's the right amount still to be working through. So through the ELM pilot, for example, the environmental land management pilot, we'll be testing lots of different approaches to payment methodology. And we'll keep doing that all the way through until we find the right mechanism that works. And that will mean that we can't be 100% certain today about what our payment methods are going to be, but it will also mean that we'll have better payment methods as we get into environmental land management from 2024. So no doubt some of your questions will focus on this, because I know it's an issue that's important to farmers. That's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. And why is getting the agriculture transition plan out important is the one final point I wanted to make, because I know that there's been some commentary about it, about whether there's enough detail in there, and we know there's more detail that people want to know. But we do think it's important to at least set out our stall in terms of what's our thinking now, what's the overall direction of travel, where can we provide clarity and certainty. And so we hope very much that the plan has done that. But I'm really looking forward now to a period of much more open, ongoing, collaborative engagement with the sector across the whole range of things that I've just outlined that are included in this programme. And I encourage everyone who's dialed in today to sign up to our blog, DEFRA. If you Google DEFRA Future Farming blog, you'll find it, and we'll be posting there twice a week from now on, starting last week, about what we're learning and what we're doing, and you can sign up to receive an email alert, and that will also include details about how to get involved in co-design activities if you're interested. And I really encourage you all to get involved in that. If you're on Twitter, if that's your particular bag, I know not everybody is, but I am, and you can always ask me a question there. And I'm also always happy to be emailed and asked questions, and if I can't answer myself, I'll put you in touch with a member of my team. And so feel free to drop me a line in whatever way works for you if you don't get your question answered today, or if you want to get in touch at any time during the course of the transition, because I am all ears, and so are the rest of the programme. And we really want to work openly and collaboratively with everyone in the sector to make this thing work. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Janet. That was excellent run through an overview of kind of how we've got here and what's going to come next. I've got a couple. While we wait, there's a few questions coming in. There's quite a lot coming in now. But while we're waiting for them to come through, and I'll try and put them into some themes. I just wanted to pick up one particular point, and it's more about the detail of the content of what's in the agricultural transition plan, and particularly about the level of cuts of BPS over the next 4 years. They were laid out in the document with cuts of at least 50% higher for some of the current larger recipients by 2024. Now, some of these are feeling pretty challenging, even for the best businesses. We already know that 75% of farming enterprises are not profitable without any BPS. And I think when people see those figures, they look pretty scary, and it's something that CLA have been arguing about for a long time, that rate of cut is very difficult for businesses to deal with. Has DEFRA conducted any detailed impact assessment on that for the different sectors, and what's in place to help businesses adapt to those big changes in BPS receipts?
Thanks. I'm just noting down your question to make sure that I answer it properly, because I sometimes get carried away and forget what the original question was. So I noted that down. So the questions are about the impact assessment on the rate of cuts to direct payments, and then what's in place to help. So in terms of the impact assessment, we have conducted an impact assessment, and we published it in September 2019 alongside the agriculture bill at the time. And we also have more recently published further updates, and there was an impact assessment to the Act just before it went through its final stages as well, which drew on that evidence compendium. So if you Google evidence compendium future farming, then you should find there the full evidence packet. It's quite a big 100 or more slides, drawing a whole range of evidence sources about what we know about what the impacts are likely to be. Now, it's first of all important to caveat this, because we are intervening here in a very complex sector. Like all systems, it's complex, and direct payments have been there for decades, and they have all sorts of consequences for all sorts of aspects of the sector, and we can't really find out exactly what the impacts are until we actually start making the cuts to those and putting them into different areas. So I don't want to pretend that I've got a crystal ball that I know exactly what's going to happen, and nor should anybody else. However, we have done a careful impact assessment, and what we learned from that was that removing direct payments overnight would be too difficult for the sector to bear, and that's why we concluded that doing a transition over the course of 7 years would be a much better idea. We looked at the impacts on different types of farm, different sizes of farms with different levels of profitability, different approaches, and we concluded from that we thought most farms would be able to be viable and sustainable without direct payments if they made changes to the way that they operate, and those changes include taking advantage of the opportunities the increased opportunities there will be for agri-environment schemes and productivity support, but also we can see from that evidence the sorts of things which the most profitable farms do, which others might be able to learn from in order to increase their margins too, in order to make up some of that lost income. And we think that for each farm, there'll be a different set of measures that you need to take depending on what your starting position is, what type of farm you are, what size of farm you are, what your appetite is for different types of intervention. But we think for all farms, some kind of agri-environment measures would be possible and appropriate to look at. And also for most farms, there are some things that you could do to further improve your margins. And the sorts of things that we see the more profitable farms doing include business planning, benchmarking, and looking at the farm as a commercial operation and understanding the costs and the outputs, and making sure that you're minimizing your costs and maximizing your outputs. And obviously you'll tell me that you're all doing that already, and I do appreciate, by the way, this is not straightforward or trivial, and that farmers think about these things all the time, but the evidence does show that there are things that can be done in addition to what you're already doing, and that there's room for improvement across the piece. So from that impact assessment, we concluded that it was possible for farms to work through the transition and be sustainable, but that there would be a larger impact on some sectors and some types of farm, and in particular upland and lowland livestock farmers, because they do tend to be more reliant in terms of their overall profitability on direct payments. And so that's why, coming to the second part of your question, that's why it's really important that we target the support that we're putting in place to those farms. And so we're going to be putting in place from next year, we're going to be commissioning advice which farmers will be able to access free of charge to help them plan through the transition and work out in your particular farm what's the right set of measures given your type of farm, your appetite, your particular level of profitability now, your target levels of profitability, etc. And so we will be making that available through existing organisations that already have trusted relationships and know how to do this from next year. And also, meanwhile, there are things that can be done from next year. So I've had questions about this kind of, is there a gap between now and 2024? And the answer is there are things you can do from next year, including there'll be a simplified countryside stewardship scheme, there'll be productivity support available, there'll be this business planning support available that you'll be able to access. And so there's a range of things that can be done right now. So I would urge everybody here, don't wait, start thinking now about the things that you want to do and the things that you're going to need to do on your particular farm. And I do just want to say very clearly, I've mentioned some things that you can do to improve profitability just in general terms on a farm, but I in no way presume to understand any particular farm, and I in no way wish to denigrate the efforts that I know the sector go to in order to be profitable. And I also appreciate there's a much wider context here in terms of food prices, trade policy, the wider economy, which will have an impact on this too. And we are very much aware of that set of issues and monitoring them closely. And I don't want to in any way suggest that it's a kind of trite or trivial matter.
If I can just follow up on that, because I think sticking with the BPS theme and the money being taken away but being recycled into new schemes, one of the concerns that frequently gets raised is that that a lot of the other ways that the money will come back into the sector isn't going to be obviously as direct as BPS, and it might be filtered off into advisors, new organisations, facilitators, and that type of thing. What's your view on that? Is that a good way of getting the money recycled into the industry? So
the vast majority of this money will go back into the industry in the form of money that is actually available to farmers and land managers. There are some very small elements which will be more put into advice, and that includes the resilience programme that I just mentioned, where we'll be offering business planning advice, but that again is for services available to farmers that they would otherwise have to pay for. So it still is for farmers, but what we definitely are not doing, and the Secretary of State could not have been clearer to us in his marching orders on this, is taking that money and using it to pay ourselves or putting it into kind of bureaucratic systems. We're not doing that, and you will no doubt hold us to account for that commitment as we go through the transition, as you rightly should. But the government's commitment is clear on this. This money is to go back into the sector.
And then another follow-up one from James Astor. All the money from direct payments will go back into new schemes. Dieter Helm said that he thought that government would look to make net savings. It seems that your position is a bit more optimistic.
Yes, it's not optimistic. It's absolutely clear in the plan that the amount of money spent in the sector will remain the same for this Parliament. Now, obviously, there'll be an election and then there'll be a new government and they will have a policy on what the overall amount of money is to go into the farming sector. And I wouldn't presume to predict what that's going to be. But for this Parliament, which is up to 24-25, there is a clear commitment in the plan that the amount of money will stay the same. And it's also been announced in the spending review that that money is to be protected and is to be going back into the sector. So particularly in the financial situation that we're in right now, we think having that clarity over a 4-year period is very helpful to us in terms of having a runway to get the programme going. I recognise there's uncertainty beyond that point, and I can't pretend otherwise, because there always is beyond the current Parliament in any area of government spending. And so it would be foolish to pretend anything otherwise. So I think that's the best answer I can give on that, I think.
Great, that sounds pretty good news, though.
I think it is. I think it is on balance, given the wider context that we're in. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So a question from Charles Luker and Chris Atkinson, who were both asked similar questions, and it was related to a point you said right at the beginning about looking back at past failures, and how you've been assessing those. So does DEFRA understand that past failures were not just the result of the CAP and the EU? Because I think there's something that we hear frequently in the industry from government that, oh, well, you know, all the problems that we've had in the past have been down to the CAP, we couldn't control it. And there's a lot of scepticism about that, because obviously DEFRA implements the policy or have implemented it in the past, and there's been problems with how it's been implemented, the RPA and others, and how it's all been managed. So have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's a really fair question. I think undoubtedly many of the problems that we see are caused by some of the complexity and requirements of the EU-based schemes, and that's what we want to start moving away from January. And we very much hope that you will start seeing evidence of improvement from January in the way that we carry out, in the way that we apply penalties, the way that we enforce the requirements of scheme agreements, and the way that we run cross compliance. However, I think it is also fair to say we can do better in the way that we administer these. So as people will know, we've made big improvements in recent years in the timeliness of payments, of basic payments and scheme payments, and we still think there's a way to go, but we're doing much better. 95% of BPS claims went out on day one of the window this year, which is an improvement on last year and a great improvement on the year before that. So we know there's more to do in terms of how quickly we turn around applications, how well we keep in touch with people, making the remaining 5% of payments on time for BPS and making more of the CS payments on time. We know, and we in DEFRA and RPA are working really hard to identify where can we make improvements in the way that we administer things, because we know that that's such an important part of building trust with the sector and showing people that we understand what's important to them. And making timely payments, of course, is kind of, you should just expect that to happen. We shouldn't be expecting a pat on the head for doing that right. That should be a basic expectation, and we fully accept that. So I think it's a fair question. I think there's always things to learn. And in terms of kind of going back a bit further, I wasn't here when we had our CAP-D programme, which was around 2015, but I have taken a good look at that and had a good conversation with colleagues and colleagues outside the organisation. And I've also talked to people who were involved in the sort of early 2000s in the introduction of ELS, and why did that initially seem to be successful and then not. And a lot of it is about just this balance between trying to make things work in a variety of circumstances, trying to achieve quite a range of different types of objectives at the same time in terms of value for money, levels of access, levels of impact, but also keeping things simple. And that is in all parts of government. That's a tension that's very difficult to manage, and we have to be open and clear about that tension and how we propose to manage it. My hope for the programme and my commitment is we will not make the same mistakes again, but we will, I'm sure, make new ones. And the reason we're taking this test and learn approach is because we want to be able to detect them early and correct them, rather than set things in stone and then we've made a mistake and that's just it. We have to live with it for 7 years. We absolutely cannot be in that world. We've got to be learning and iterating as we go, and that's why we've designed the programme in that way. But if whoever asked the question has got particular thoughts about what you think we should be learning from the past that I haven't covered here, I'd love you to get in touch, because I'm harvesting information all the time from people's brains about this, and I would really love to know what's in yours about where you think we're going wrong and what you think we can do better.
Great, thank you, Janet. There's quite a number of questions that I'm seeing coming through. Some of them are very long, so I'm okay. Not able to read them all quite as quickly as I'd like to, but there's quite a number coming in around countryside stewardship. So people who are making decisions about going into countryside stewardship for next year, thinking a little bit further forward, how will that relate to the sustainable farming incentive that could be coming in 2022 and beyond? And there's a whole number of other projects and initiatives going on, Nature Recovery Network, local nature strategies coming through from the Environment Bill. How do all these interrelate? You know, what's the relation between them? How do you integrate them? How do people make a decision about whether they should go into countryside stewardship next year? Should they wait for the sustainable farming incentive first? Should they wait until ELMs? Will ELMs be better? Will they be able to switch into ELMs? And I think this is it really highlights one of the points of the criticisms of the transition plan. While it sets the direction of travel, there are people that are really needing to make some decisions very soon about what they're going to be doing with their land and their business. We feel that there's just not enough information yet to help make those decisions.
Yeah, we've heard that feedback loud and clear, and we were expecting it, because we know that we can't know what no single document is ever going to answer absolutely everybody's questions about what's going to happen. And so we are very mindful of the things that people want to know next. In terms of what to do over the next couple of years, our advice, we are going to be improving countryside stewardship, and we'll publish some information before March next year about the 2021 application window and scheme, which will show how we're going to do that and what's available. And the improvements that we're making are designed to make it more attractive, to de-risk it for people, so that you're not feeling like, I know lots of people don't go into CS because they're too worried about disproportionate penalties and losing all the money for having made a minor breach. So you'll see in it some improvements that I think will make it more attractive to people, more people to take part. And our advice is, don't wait. If you want to get involved in agri-environment schemes, get involved in CS as soon as you can, and we will make sure that there is a smooth transition from CS into environmental land management at the point that environmental land management is ready for you to do that. So you'll be able to exit without a penalty clause from CS and apply to go and transfer into environmental land management. So we very much recommend that you do that. We'll be introducing sustainable farming incentive from 2022. We'll publish details about that before June next year, about what we'll pay for and how much. And so you'll want to take a look at that as well, and think about that as an option for you from 2022 onwards. But I would, like I say, don't wait to get involved, and take the chances that are there as they arise. In terms of how things, so that's the kind of what to do next, which is get in to CS if you're interested in doing that stuff, and also to keep an eye out for the productivity support that will be available from next year in terms of grants and wider support to improve your productivity and improve your margin. In terms of how different things fit together, because of the way we're gradually rolling this out, there will be some double running. So countryside stewardship will carry on existing as with other schemes, and we'll be gradually introducing environmental land management. And we think that's the right thing to do, because in all of my experience in government and the history of government failure, doing a big bang release one day where you kind of pull back the curtains and release a new thing doesn't work, and is very risky, and that's the last thing we want to do, is launch a thing that doesn't work. So we think it's right to roll out gradually. However, that does create some complexity, because we are going to be double running things, and we're going to be introducing some things while we phase some things out. Where we want to get to by 2024 is that there's a coherent service that you can go to, and you can find out all the different things that are available to you through government, and we may even link to other things that are available from outside government. We haven't worked that out yet, but there'll be a coherent service where you'll be able to say, well, I want to get involved in this component of environmental land management, I want to take advantage of this particular grant support, I need some advice on this part of regulation, and you can see it all there together. That's the vision of where we're trying to get to. There are some schemes in the years between now and 2024 which are kind of interim measures, because we don't have the full environmental land management service ready yet. So for now, we're looking at how can we signpost those really clearly and make it obvious to everybody what's available. And the leaflet that we sent out, I've just had mine in the post yesterday, called Farming is Changing, that will be going to all farmers, BPS claimants, very soon, don't know the timing, very soon though, sets out a wider range of things that are available, and tries to start putting all that information in one place for people, because we recognise that, we want people to have all that information available to them.
Yeah, that booklet is also going out with the CLA Land and Business magazine in January. So if it doesn't land on your doorstep shortly, it soon will, from the CLA. And
it's online too. You can, if you Google "farming is changing," you'll find it on gov.uk. If you can't wait for your shiny hard copy, it's there too.
Right, thank you. I think a similar question from Bridget Bedell and Francis. They're asking, well, it's about this clarity. It feels like it's a very confusing landscape now. We've got the legacy schemes like BPS and countryside stewardship that are still going, but will be getting phased out. And then we've got any number of new ones coming in around with new grant schemes, new resilience schemes, the different elms coming in at different stages, and tree health and animal welfare and animal health programs coming in. And that's before you get on to things like diversification and
sorry, that's my cat meowing loudly in the background. I don't know that you can hear that. She likes to get involved. I do apologise if it's in any way distracting.
I'm sure she's very welcome to join in. There's also new environmental markets, private sector markets like biodiversity net gain and carbon trading, and it feels like there's an awful lot going on. What is there? I mean, you've mentioned about the Environmental Land Management Service, but that wouldn't necessarily deal with all the different things that are changing in the marketplace. What would you suggest farmers and landowners do about that?
Well, it depends. So I always ask farmers that I meet, who do you trust for advice? Where do you go? And each answer is different, and it's very rarely DEFRA, to be quite honest. And so I think we have to respect that fact. And so I think there are farmers farmers that I've spoken to tend to really value discussion groups, local facilitation groups, talking to their vet, talking to their agronomist, talking to peers over the hedge and over the fence. And so I don't really want to tell people where to go. I think for our part, in government, we have to provide that information in as clear a way as we possibly can, and that's what we've tried to do in the Farming is Changing booklet, and that's what we'll do in the way we design our service going forward. And before we launched the Agriculture Transition Plan, we got in touch with lots of people that we know farmers will be ringing. So we got in touch with all the membership organisations and gave them the advisor pack. We got in touch with vets, agronomists, various other types of organisations, inspectors, inspection, automatic accredited certification company regimes, that's what I'm thinking of, so that they can give advice to farmers, because we know that that's where people go for advice. And so I think the answer is different depending on who you trust, really. And we know that farmers trust a range of people. So we'll concentrate on trying to provide a coherent service, providing clear information about what we're doing, and making sure that those advisors have that information, providing the free advice from next year so that people can access an actual person who can come and sit at the kitchen table and think through what's the business plan for this particular farm and what are the various options available. And then I think we need to see how things unfold. And if there are people here who've got ideas about other things that we can do as well, then I'm all ears. Please let me know, and I'll be keen to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you. I've got a quick follow-up on that around diversification. So in the Agriculture Transition Plan, there was very little mention of UK shared prosperity funds. So in the past, the Rural Development Programme for England covered socio-economic schemes, which provided funding through LEADER and others for diversification on farms and for the rural community. That doesn't appear to be covered anymore, and we understand that's going to be going through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. But there's very little about that. Like, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund hasn't got a date of introduction, and we fear that there's a bit of a gap just at the point now when people are going to be looking at the business thinking, you know, BPS is coming down, I need to be looking at other options, and yet there's nothing there. Is that something that DEFRA is looking at?
We are, but I'm afraid this is one of the slight kind of inconveniences of machinery of government, because that is actually now the responsibility of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So MHCLG own the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and they are working on what the future of that looks like. And we, of course, are feeding into that to make sure that what we're doing as a whole in government is consistent and clear. But they are in the driving seat, and those proposals are we're not ready in time for us to be able to include in the plan, I'm afraid. But if you wanted to, you should get MHCLG to come and talk to you a bit further about what their plans are for that fund. Sorry, I don't want to sound slopey-shouldered, but I genuinely, I'm responsible for a lot of things. I'm just not responsible for that particular thing.
I think it's who's responsible for the gap between now and when this shared prosperity fund comes along, and it feels that should really sit with DEFRA, given that's where it was.
And
I think that's the challenge we would put back to you.
Yeah, so we are looking after the existing schemes and the existing payments, and RDPE will continue to exist, and we will continue to administer that and pay out through those existing agreements and schemes. And then we're working with MHCLG as to what the future looks like.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to move on to sort of a group of questions around more specifically on ELM, not ELM as we've all got used to calling it, but ELM, the Environmental Land Management Scheme. David Barnett has a question that will those who have already made considerable environmental improvements on their land over many years be rewarded in the future? That's the first question. And there's also one on organic. There's no mention of organic farming in ELM's proposals. Even though ELM's organic farming meets all the requirements of ELM. So how will organic farms be treated? there's two for you to
Okay.
think about just now.
Well, why don't I chew on those first, and then we can get into the rest of them. So the first question about existing improvements, yes is the answer. So we definitely want to pay for maintaining things that are good for the environment, climate change and animal welfare, as well as new things. To be worked through is exactly how we do that and what the balance of investment looks like. But we certainly have made a commitment that anybody who is already doing things will not be disadvantaged and won't lose out. So please do not think, well, I won't do anything then, or I'll kind of destroy what I've done so I can start again and get recognized for it. That's all perverse outcomes that we absolutely recognize could happen and want to avoid. So we are building into the way we think about this, how do we reward and properly recompense those things that are being maintained, as well as new things that are being put in place. And that's really important for those who are either in CS agreements already or other agreements or environmental stewardship agreements, or who are doing things and not yet being rewarded for them. And there's a lot of people in those two categories, and so we absolutely must bring all of those people along with us and build from there, rather than kind of leaving that behind. So we very much recognise that issue and are building it into the way we design environmental land management. And the details of how we're doing that will come out when we talk about what we're going to pay for and how much, which will be in the first half of next year for sustainable farming incentives. So just so you know, I'm not kicking it down into long grass years away. That is information that we will put out next year when we talk about SFI. On organic, we do mention organic, but it's not a great big section. And what we say is that we want to make sure that what we're designing will work for organic farms. And we also list other types of farms and other types of issues where we are just to acknowledge that these are important issues that need to be worked through. We need to work through how we do that exactly, because we don't want to undercut the premium that organic goods can command in the market. And we don't want to undermine that, but we also do want, obviously, lots of the things that are done on organic farms can contribute to environmental, biodiversity and climate outcomes. Same with regenerative farming, actually, although there isn't necessarily an accredited scheme for it in the same way. There are lots of actions that people take on those farms, which we want to recognise and support. And so we're working with organic bodies to make sure that what we're doing properly reflects their needs. They have been in touch since we published the plan, and we are talking to them about how we can make sure we're properly incorporating that in a way that, like I say, doesn't skew the market premium that can be commanded by those goods, but also properly rewards the public goods that those farms are producing as well.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to have to speed up on the questions now. So
sorry, I'll speed up on my answers as well. Let's do a rapid fire. Let's do a rapid fire round of Q&A. I'll do my best to go quickly.
So there's a few on CS and SFI, the Sustainable Farming Incentive. The first question is from Josie Palmer, was about how will the two of them relate, because countryside stewardship often covers hedgerows, and then SFI might include hedgerows as well. So how will that relate?
So I can tell you the principle of that is that we won't pay for the same action twice through two different schemes, because that's obviously not good value for public money. But we do want it to be possible for people who are in CS agreements of one sort or another also to take out an SFI agreement on something like soil, for example, which is not well covered in CS. We are working through the detail of how we make this happen in as simple and straightforward a way as possible. But the intent is certainly that you can do both, but that you don't get paid twice for the same action, because that's not fair on other people who are not getting that extra payment.
And then staying with CS, countryside stewardship, traditionally not been taken up particularly highly in the uplands for lots of reasons, the payment rates, the options. So what's being done to make it more attractive for the uplands, I think is one of there's quite a number of questions around that. It's been raised a number of times. Yeah,
so there's a few different elements of this, and we are working really closely we have our engagement group representatives who really understand the uplands much better than we can ever claim to help us work through these issues and understand them. And there's two different elements to this. One is making sure that there are relevant options for farms in the uplands to take, and actually livestock farmers in the uplands do tend to be kind of reasonable uptakers of countryside stewardship, as I understand it, relative to other types of farm. But we can do more to make sure that what we're proposing is relevant. And then secondly, we are looking in the round at payment rates and making sure that they properly reflect the kind of the right level for all of the areas, because we know that in the uplands there are particular costs and particular issues. And so we are looking at both of those things, both scheme design to make sure it's relevant, and also payment rates and the way we calculate them to make sure that they are reasonable, fair, and incentivize all of the actions that we want to see being taken, and that they're accessible to all different types of farm and relevant and attractive to all different types of farm.
And that will follow through into ELM. So it's
Yes, exactly.
looking at countryside stewardship and following through into ELM as well.
Yeah,
because
that's
I think
right.
there's a particular concern about the uplands with ELM and what will be available.
That's right.
There as
Yeah,
well.
so I'm particularly talking there about ELM, but we are also talking about what does it look like between now and 2024, where we're double running CS and ELM, and that's why I say we're looking at these issues in the round across all schemes to make sure that we're making improvements now, and then we'll carry those improvements through into ELM from 24 onwards.
Now, I'm just going to look back to the question about people who are already doing good things. Mike Tristram has said, double confirm. So if a farmer has already been building up soil quality and worm numbers for a decade already, they will be no worse off than somebody starting to regenerate soils from a very low base.
Yes, that is the intent. Absolutely. And if you want to get in, by the way, if you want to get involved in helping us answer that question, then contact me either through Twitter or email, and I can point you to how to get involved, because people who clearly, if you're asking that question, you understand the issues. So please do get involved and help us shape the answer to make sure it works.
Great. There's a few questions about advice from quite a few people, Caroline Knox and others. Is there enough capacity to give advice? I presume that's for ELM. Oh yeah, so who will be able to give it? Will farmers be able to access ELM without using an advisor? So there's sort of two questions there. Is the capacity within the advisory sector, and do you have to use an ELM advisor?
Yeah, so I'll take the kind of do you need an advisor point first, actually. And so for sustainable farming incentive, our hypothesis is that we can design a scheme which is straightforward enough and attractive enough for people to use, that they don't have to pay someone to navigate the way through the bureaucracy, which a lot of people feel they have to do now for countryside stewardship. And so you should not need advice on just how to fill in the forms to make sure you don't make a mistake that costs you money in order to participate in sustainable farming incentive. And the way we want to design it is with that in mind. So you shouldn't need an advisor. And also we think the actions there ought to be sufficiently comprehensible and actionable that you don't need an advisor in order to work out whether they're relevant on your farm and how to implement them. Having said that, though, we think that there may well be a need for advice on what to do on your farm and what's the right set of actions to take for your particular circumstance. And we know from initiatives like the Catchment Sensitive Farming Initiative, which you might be familiar with, that where we do provide advice about, in that case, diffuse water pollution, it can really massively increase the environmental outcomes on that particular farm. And so we know that there is a place for advice in this set of schemes, and we think, and obviously the components which are more complex and bespoke, like local nature recovery and landscape recovery, there might be more of a place for advice. So how are we proposing to deal with that? There's two elements to this. One is we already have a lot of capacity within the DEFRA group, within RPA and NE and others, of advisors and inspectors. And so one of the questions is, how do we use that capacity and capability in a more productive, constructive way, so that we're doing less box ticking and more actual genuine advising? But also beyond that, we think there's a huge role for the market to play here in providing valued, relevant, constructive advice, because we know that, for example, in a particular valley in the Lake District, that somebody who is an advisor who lives there, who's known it all their lives and knows everybody there and knows all of the issues and knows all of the farms, is going to be much better placed than a DEFRA official to provide advice to those farmers, quite possibly. And so we're looking through our tests and trials and through the national pilot for ELM, we're looking at what's the right model, what are the actual needs for advice, first of all, is the most important thing to understand. What do farmers need and land managers need? And then secondly, what's the most useful mix of ways to provide that? And we're confident that through a combination of using our resource better and more in a more targeted, advice-led way, and helping the market to provide relevant advice and stimulating that market to grow in whatever way it needs to, that we'll be able to provide the right package of advice for people as they need it.
Great, thank you. Now, I've got, there's some questions, there's quite a few questions around very sort of process points that I think might be worth, you probably won't be able to answer them right now, but I just want to highlight them just so that everyone knows that we're on the case, and we might want to follow up them later. So it's things like, if a business is being restructured now, how will it affect future payments, particularly with delinking and the decline in payments? We've covered the CS agreement. If it's ending this year, what happens? There was a, sorry, I've lost the question now. Sorry, I should have noted it down when I had it in front of me. Where were, I think it was around making the decisions about, sorry, I covered the making decisions about CS. Where can you check what your future payments are going to be? There's information in the document, but Is there a tool that you can use that can calculate
Yes.
each year? There's quite a few around that. And then if we can do those quickly, because I also want to cover payment rates and how they're going to be decided. So the income forgone question, and I would like to do a little bit on trees. And if possible, I've got a question about AONBs and national park funding. So
all right, why don't I see what I can do to try and answer as many of those as I can really quickly so that we can get into any further questions. So is there a tool for calculating your payments? Yes, there is. It's on the AHDB website, and they've created a tool where you can put in what's your 2020 payment, and therefore what should you expect your payments to be in each of the subsequent years. So I recommend that you go and take a look there. What if CS ends this year? We are offering rollover agreements for people if they want to roll forward their CS agreement. Talk to the RPA. Obviously I can't comment on any particular circumstance or particular agreement, so contact the RPA if you want to know what's happening in your particular case on that. But we will provide a smooth path for people to go from CS into ELM, whether that's through getting a whole new agreement in place or rolling over your existing one, will depend on your particular circumstances. And so I can't really answer that in a kind of general way without knowing the details. What happens if a business reorganizes now, and what happens to the direct payments? That's a really difficult question for me to answer without knowing the kind of details of what you're doing. But basically, you will continue between now and 2024. You will continue making a claim each year in the way that you do now, but what you get will be a reduced amount. When we do delinking, we'll propose to do that based on a reference period, and then we'll calculate what you would have got for the remaining period, and we'll consult about how we'll do that early in 2021. In the first 2 months of 2021, there'll be a consultation document which will be about how we do delinking and what's on offer in terms of the lump sum exit scheme. And I saw a question whiz past about that. So the consultation for that will be out by February, and you'll be able to see much more detail then about what we're proposing to do on both of those points. Payment rates and the income forgone question. So there's two aspects to this. Number one is we think there are things we can do within income forgone to make it into a fairer, more attractive, more kind of appropriate way of paying for now, and we'll make those changes for the national pilot of ELM, and the national pilot will start with income forgone as the kind of basis of calculation. However, we are looking, as the Secretary of State said last week, at how what's the model for calculating payment rates, and how do we make sure that we're doing that in a way that properly rewards the public goods that are being produced, properly pays for them, and also it incentivizes all of the actions being taken that we want to see. And there'll be more to come in the first quarter of next year. So before March next year, we will be saying more about how we propose to do that for the Sustainable Farming Incentive from 2022. And we'll be consulting and discussing what the range of options are, what the trade-offs are, and coming to a view before we publish details in June 2021. And I did see a question going by actually about when will we move from we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that, to actually what we're going to do. And I saw that and thought I need to answer that question. So even though you haven't asked it, I'm going to anyway, which is that we have put in the agriculture transition plan and in the advisor pack, which I recommend you look at if you haven't looked yet, the dates of when we will be coming out with further detail about all of these things. But for the biggest ones are the exit scheme and delinking, where we'll be publishing the consultation by February, the details of the national pilot, which will also come out by February, the details of Sustainable Farming Incentive will come out by June, the details of next year's CS agreements will be come out in February and March, and there's a much longer list in the advisor pack of dates when you can expect further information. But broadly, what you can expect over the next 6 months is much more definitive information about what's going to be happening, coming in a much more frequent, open way, and we'll be also telling you how you can get involved in helping shape the answers where we don't have them yet. So I am conscious of the need to move from we'd like to we are going to, and we are doing that as quickly as we can for people. And as I said at the beginning, there is a trade-off between providing that clarity and doing the co-design work that we want to do, and learning and adapting as we go. And I'll make no apology for doing that learning and adapting, because I believe that when we're sitting here in 7 years and reflecting on where we've got to, we will be in a much better place if we do it that way.
Thank you. We might just book you in for 7 years' time.
Please do. I'm happy to come whenever you like, as often as you like, and you can hold me to account for the commitments I'm making here, and whether we're delivering them or not.
Probably very frequently in the meantime.
Yeah, please do.
We've still got time. I just wanted to quickly cover forestry and woodland, because I think a lot of people would have been forgiven from first viewing of the agricultural transition plan and the farming investment fund, and a lot of the terminology that's used in the agricultural transition plan is very farming orientated. But there is, if you dig in deep enough, there is quite a lot in there for forestry and woodland. I think particularly, there's some questions around whether agroforestry will be included within ELM. Will management of existing woodland be included in ELM? And then there's obviously the woodland creation, and just sort of some ideas about where, the extent to which we'll see a much greater degree of integration of forestry and woodland into the agriculture policy than perhaps we've seen in the past, because it was always a separate issue with the CAP.
Yes, so I can answer some of that question, but not all of it yet, because some of it is not decided yet. I feel self-conscious saying that after my last answer, but that is where we are. We certainly want to break down the binary kind of definitions of forestry over here, agriculture over here, so that you have nonsensical situations where you can't have wood pasture recognised as a valid form of farming. And so we're certainly looking at that. We are looking at how do we make sure that where you've got land which has got both woodland and farming type activities on it, other types of farming activities on it, how do you have a coherent user experience and a coherent service? The extent to which things will be actually processed through the environmental land management service that are currently done through woodland creation and maintenance schemes is to be decided over the course of what we're doing. But over the course of the next few years and through our tests and trials and pilots and scheme design, etc. But we are aware of this issue and working on it and working out what the right answer is. And whoever it is that asked that question, feel free to get in touch. I have posted my email address in the chat, so feel free to get in touch if you want to help us solve that problem. Because one of the things is, by the way, one of the considerations there is that it's kind of there's two things here. One is we want to take a much more integrated approach. Two is this money is to go back into farming, and so it's not to be diverted into other things. And so there's two kind of countervailing pressures there that we're managing and working out. How do we work our way through those in the right way?
Great, thank you. And we will circulate your email if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure.
In an email after the event, because not everybody can see the chat bar.
Yeah, fine.
Just one final question, and then we're probably going to have to wrap up. It's from Chris Woodruff, who asked one of the first questions and has retabled it as a shorter version. Thank you very much. Is the farming in protected landscape programme a short-term test or a longer-term commitment to AONBs and national parks?
It's a short-term investment, at least it is for now. So it's over the 3 years where we'll be putting money through those protected areas to make it available for farms to make improvements either for public access or environmental outcomes. Because we recognise the importance of those areas, we recognise that lots of the farms in those areas are more reliant on direct payments, so we want to make sure there's money available in the intervening period before full rollout of environmental land management.
Great, thank you. I think what happens is that once we sort of talk about a topic, then there's more questions.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm happy to come back again and do a part two anytime you like.
I think we might be able to just squeeze in a quick one, and,
yeah, sure.
And I think it's one that I'd quite like to explore anyway. It was from Claire Dakin about, will the woodland carbon guarantee continue in tandem with, sorry, it's below my screen, with the ELM? And I mean, I think that goes beyond that. It's really a question about how does ELM merge with or sit alongside other private sources of funding for environmental delivery, like biodiversity net gain, the carbon markets, and maybe other water companies and other sources of funding.
I don't know the answer to that question. Sorry, I'm not familiar enough with woodland policy to know the answer to that question. So I'm happy to find it out and send it to you for afterwards. I do just want to come back on what Anthony Weston just put in, which is there's plenty of learning and adapting that can be done from 30 years plus of agri-environment. So I really want to respond to that, because we in no way are starting this as though from a blank sheet of paper. We are absolutely drawing on that learning from those 30 years. However, we're also making some quite significant changes, more significant than have been done for 50 years, to a very complex system. And so we do need to do that in an iterative way, testing and learning as we go as well. So it's not either or, it's building on what we've learned so far, taking it forward and continually learning and improving as we go. And we're not waiting for the end of 7 years to see what we've learned and then decide what to do. This will be a rapid feedback cycle of learning, implementing something, seeing how it goes, learning, adapting it, repeat all the way through the transition.
Great, thank you. We have got just a couple of minutes left, and I do have a couple of things to finish off with, so I'm probably going to have to stop that. Janet, that's been absolutely amazing. It's been a very intense hour for you, I think. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and listen. I mean what I say. I'm more than happy to come back anytime you like to pick up contact with people bilaterally to run other sessions. I'm very happy to answer anybody's questions as we go along and to be held to account for what we're doing. Brilliant, thank you. We have actually got a couple of, we are running similar sessions to this in the regions in January and February, and we're hoping to have a DEFRA speaker at those. We're just sorting that out as it is.
Great.
If we just put the slides up again, we've just got a few other points just at the end, just to finish up on. I mean, I think, yeah, takeaways from today. I hope I've done justice to all your questions that are coming in. There is more about the Agricultural Transition Plan on the CLA website, and there's an analysis that we have done of the report. So please go to the website. Down at the bottom of that slide there as well, I've also given a shout out to Janet's blog, which is really good and it is well worth having a look at. And it's going to be regularly updated a couple of times a week, is it, Janet, I think?
Sorry, on mute. Yes, a couple of times a week, and you can sign up to get an email every time we update it. So I really encourage you all to do that, and let us know what you think. And if you've got topics you want us to blog about, then write it in a comment on the blog, and we will do our best to answer. Yeah,
it's a great way to keep the conversation going. The CLA, obviously, we've got our regional teams are ready to answer your questions as well, and the national team as well. We're producing quite a lot of guidance notes on various things related to transition and all the different schemes, but there's also other things where people are taking a more strategic view of businesses to help you look at your future prospects and what you might want to do with your business. I think that's probably all I've got to say, other than to give a shout out for our webinar series. We've got an In Conversation with Tony Juniper, Chairman of Natural England, tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And then next week we're running an Are You Ready for Trade to Trade After Brexit next Thursday at 11 o'clock. And then you can access all these resources on our website, including all the presentations and the digital content from our Rural Powerhouse Week, which was at the end of November. And there's masses of brilliant stuff on there with interviews with members and Dieter Helm and George Eustace and many others that are really useful and informative information on there. So I think that's it for just now. I would just say thank you all for attending. Thank you for your questions. We will have a review of all the questions and try and provide answers to those if we haven't actually managed to get to your questions after the event. But yeah, thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you at our next event soon. Thank you.